All right, welcome back. We are MDEV1004, Mobile APIs and Frameworks in the summer 2024 semester, Georgian, and it's week 6, part 1 of our broadcast and recording. And today, things are a little different. I'm doing this recording asynchronously. I have shared it on Discord just in case someone wants to jump on and watch it. But for the most part, it's going to be me solo talking to you guys. All right. So again, apologies for that. I did have a bit of conflict this morning, and I couldn't attend as normal. But here it is. So it should be straightforward. I suspect that things are going to work pretty much the same way that they always work with us, which is I'm going to demonstrate something, I'm going to do an in-class exercise, which is going to be due on Sunday, and we have to talk about a couple of housekeeping items. Let's do that now. So first and foremost, assignment 2, it's still orange, but really, at the end of the day, we should mark this thing as red. And the reason why we're going to mark it as red is because this is due actually on Sunday at midnight. And this is due at the same time as your in-class exercise 6. We've talked about this. This is one of those weeks that is probably going to be worth more than other weeks. So again, your in-class exercise is worth 4% of your grade, and then your assignment 2 is worth 7.5% of your grade. So it's going to be like an 11.5% week, right? Now, remember what I'm asking for in assignment 2. And let's just go over that really quickly, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, because I want to make sure that that is the case. So if we look at assignment 2 one more time, and I just wanted to quickly do that, you're going to use assignment 1 as a base. And what you're doing with assignment 2 is using assignment 1 and the content that you had, you're going to at least add all those, the endpoints we talked about, which are going to include a list of all your movies, the ability for you to find one movie like we did before, add a new movie, update an existing movie, delete an existing movie. You're going to demonstrate all this, these 5 API endpoints that we talked about. And you're also going to implement security to some degree, okay? And I mean that like you'll add in the authentication pieces you need, right? So it says that. It says your API will also include authentication capabilities, but will not require authentication to be functional for your endpoints. And the reason for this is because we haven't really talked about it except for today. So I can't expect you guys to get it done for Sunday. But the reason why I'm talking about that this is preparatory, and then one thing also people have asked is, isn't this the same as like in-class exercise, a combination of in-class exercise 5? Because you kind of did that, as an example with that, and we did it, yeah, but it's going to be your full movie list and everything else. It'll give you a chance to go through it one more time and make sure it's the final thing. One thing I'm asking for, and again, for 7.5%, it's almost like, a gift. I always look at these things as something like that. Please go through it. Some marks were lost last time for assignment 1. When it came to things that are very silly, like internal documentation. So make sure you document stuff that we talked about before. Mandatory, of course, is GitHub. Deploying to your cloud server of choice, I recommend render again. Update everything so it uses, render just like before. For GitHub, ensure 100% that assignment 2 is a separate repository from assignment 1. We talked about this. Assignment 2 cannot be the same repository. It must be something that is unique. And the reason why it's far easier for me to mark assignment 2 if it's based on its own repository, you could do a couple things here. You could make sure that assignment 2 is actually uses the same commits. And the way you do that is you copy assignment 1, you put it into another folder, rename it assignment 2, change some stuff in the package.json like we normally do, and then because you've copied that hidden .git folder, what you can do with it is you remove the remote and then you point to the new repository. You can look up how to do that. And if you did that, you'll see that you can actually keep all of your commits from assignment 1 and add to them, right? So that's something that you could have done if you wanted to. If you haven't done that, and if you're just doing assignment 2 and you're going to start now, which is fine, that's fine. The difference between assignment 2 and in-class exercise 6 is in-class exercise 6 actually adds in your secure API endpoints, which is something we're going to talk about today. So at the end of the day, take a look. Most of the stuff is pretty much things that you've done. It's not like we haven't done these things. I'm not asking for extra endpoints that we haven't done already. And it says you must include a model and a controller for a user. You have that already for in-class exercise 5. We talked about that last week. You must include an endpoint for logging into the server, right? So that's like things like login, register. We talked about all these things, but there really isn't anything that you can do. You have to test these things. Make sure you demonstrate this in your video again, just like you did for in-class exercise 5. But again, it doesn't stop anyone from using the endpoints because we haven't covered that yet, right? And then finally, you do your little video. Make sure you have an image of you and a title card, like you've got. Most of you know how to do this, and then you're good to go. Okay, I will create a rubric for this, so when you get marks for this next week, you'll see that the rubric will be created. So that is something that we're looking for assignment 2. Remember, this is due this Sunday, June 16th at midnight, 7.5% of your grade. It's really just an extension of what we've done within class exercise 4 and 5. And for the most part, I think you guys are pretty good to go with this one. Okay, so that's kind of like we built it together. That's what we're kind of trying to do. We're trying to build this stuff out so it's not like, you know, something that you've never seen before. So that is assignment 2. I just wanted to go over that again with you just to make sure that that is important. Next week is special. Next week we're doing a mid-semester test, and because you guys are fully remote and or some people will be online and so on, remember what I'm going to do. The plan is for the mid-semester test that I will release it on a release your mid-semester test on the Monday-ish, and you will have probably until Friday. I say probably because it really depends on when I release it. I want to give you enough time to get it done. And what it's going to do is it's going to help you or ask you to practice the same things that we've done with in-class exercises 1 through 6 and your assignment 1 and 2 in some other application. Okay, each version of the test will be slightly different for you, and you'll see why when I explain it. I will make a short video, you know, that will come out on Monday, most likely. And on Monday, I'll also send an announcement out that says, hey, your test is ready and all that kind of stuff. You can start it at any time, and you'll have the entire week to get it done. This test will not take a week to do. Okay, I'm not making it so this is a week-long take-home assignment. It's something that you can do, you know, within a few hours. Okay, that's how much it'll take. You can break it up over the week. You can do it when you like, but you must submit it by the due date, whatever that due date happens to be. Again, I will let you know. And usually I give you 5 full days to get it done. Okay, so something that's pretty simple for you to do. It's practical. Realistically, like I said, if we were in a different delivery mode, like let's say, for example, we were meeting in person, this would be actually in person. We would do this in class. But we don't have that delivery mode, so you'll be given time to get this done. That's coming up next week, starting on Monday, right? So, you know, it's a bit of balance. There's going to be a few things, and this is worth 15% of your grade, so it'll be another big week for you. At the end of next week, once you've got this stuff done, and then I mark it during the mid-semester break, you will have enough information to understand where you stand in the course. I think you should have it already now. You're seeing the trend, how things are going with most of your stuff. There are no extensions for this. So your mid-semester tests, you know, if you miss it, it's gone, right? That's 15% gone. So please make sure, I'm going to make an announcement, but please make sure you get it done by the due date. There are no extensions. There are no lates. All right, so if you're late 1 minute, 0. Please make sure you get this done properly. This is like a test in real life. So when we're sitting in, like, you know, in person, and, you know, you haven't finished, whatever you submit is what I'm going to mark, right? Again, really important stuff for the test. Make sure you have your video. Make sure you have your GitHub link. Make sure they're accessible to me so I can see them, okay? Check your submission, all right? Because, you know, I don't want any problems. I don't want things like, well, Tom, I forgot to make your, you know, the stuff, you know, unlisted and give you access. No. Please don't do those kind of things. We've been doing this now for a while. It's weeks and weeks that we've been training for this thing. So it's nothing that you should be unfamiliar with in terms of how to put this together, you know, how to structure your assignment and everything else like that. I don't think it's something that's going to be foreign to you or something that's like, you know, undoable or anything like that. So that is your mid-semester test. That's coming up again next week. Again, I will release the details of what you need to do Monday, and I'll make a small video and so on. And I'll post everything online that you can start your thing going, and you should have no problem getting this done. So that is coming up. So that is where we're sitting. We're sitting here. Notice that there was that note from last week. Note, we will be asynchronous. We are asynchronous right now. So I'm recording at 4. Usually we're together at 11. So it's kind of off in terms of time frame. That means you can watch this thing anytime and get it done. And again, just a reminder that those two things are due this Sunday. You have to balance things off the way it works for you. So what are we doing today anyway, right? What we're doing is we've got third-party authentication. We've talked a little bit about this already. I'm not going to implement this. We've talked about this very briefly. I'm going to go and review this again. JWT, which is what we're really going to be focusing on this week, in-class exercise 6 due this Sunday, assignment 2 this Sunday. And please don't forget, coming up, which is, upcoming, we should say that too, right? Upcoming is your, mid-semester tests, right? Which is really happening week 7, right? And it'll be by the end of the week, due by the end of the week, whatever time that means. Now, most likely it's going to be Friday, all right? That's normally how I do it. I typically don't do it on Saturdays. I don't want you guys to be overburdened with that kind of stuff. I'm sure there are other mid-semester tests you're doing, right? So that's something that I don't want to add more stress to you guys and, push this off, but it's going to be due all next week. You guys decide when it's comfortable for you. All right, without further ado, then let's start our in-class exercise 6, and let's talk about where we were before. So I want to talk about authentication with JWT and what that is. So far, and I'm just going to download, because I'm on another computer this week, I'm just going to go into command prompt here for a second, and I'm going to swim to our desktop where I have our stuff. So this is kind of something that I've been doing with these other sections. And what I want to do here is I want to clone our repository because that's what we have to do. So I'm just going to go up here and grab the repository link, which is going to be here. It's the API. It's not what we want. We want this one. We want this one. I'll be okay. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I want to grab this repository link. So I'm going to grab this one and go over to my command prompt. What I want to do here, like normal, is kind of go to, so change directory to, and I want to move to this. There we go. And then in here, I'm going to issue that command, which is git clone. You don't have to do this. I'm doing this because I'm on a different computer. And then I'm just going to kind of slap that, git URI in. And when I do that, it's going to clone my repository. All the stuff that we had before will be here. What I really care about, of course, is, not the entire repository, just in-class exercise 6, which we don't have yet. I'm just going to close this off now. I don't need it. I'm just going to copy paste that and create in-class exercise 6 based on in-class exercise 5. There we go. There, just like normal. This is what we do. And I'm going to grab our Visual Studio Code. Right, there we go. And I'm just going to grab this and kind of populate it in there. Okay, so boom, there's our in-class exercise 6 problems, right? Problems. So I need to do a couple things here. And one of the things I need to do is a yarn install because I don't have my node modules in there, just like normal, because I've copy pasted everything from, or cloned it from GitHub. And of course, GitHub doesn't store node modules, and it also doesn't store my .env file, which I need. Okay, so I'm going to grab that. So again, let's do that. Oh, by the way, here's something else. Think about, how do I get that information now? That's pretty messed up, right? Because if I don't have that, like I can't really do much with it. Let's see what happens. So I'm going to do a yarn install. That's the first part. There's my yarn install. And there we go. It's going to install all that kind of stuff. It's going to kind of install everything we need. This is my yarn version's out of date here, and it's saying that I should go to yarn 1.22.22. Let's do that. So I'll say we'll just do an npm install yarn. You don't have to do this, most likely, -G, which basically installs the latest version of yarn in my node install. Okay, that's what it does. And let's see what this does. There we go. So then if I do a yarn ---- version, you can see that, hey, I'm back now at 1.22.22. Yay, right? Okay, so that's that part. We have this. The only thing we're missing is a .m file, and let's do that. So I'll put a .env file. And we know we need to kind of install that really funky stuff in there. And what is it going to be called? Well, we know a couple things that are going to be called. We know that our configuration for our DB is called Mongo URI. So that's one thing. So I'm going to kind of put that inside of my .env file. There we go. And we also know that we also need the other one, because if I go here, we also need the app secret that I used from last week. And I need to set that up as well. So there's this part, app secret. And once we've got those two pieces and at least there, then we can probably get some of this stuff from Render. Let's see if I can get that from Render, because Render has everything that I need, most likely. Let's take a look. So there's render.com. I'm going to go to my dashboard. And I'm trying to do this pretty quick so you see what I'm doing, so not to waste your time, you know, and that kind of thing. So you can see the process if I had to recover this kind of stuff. So here you can see MDEV1004. You know, this is the API information, and I want to grab that stuff where it's going to be. So I'm going to kind of go in there, and I'm going to go to environment, and under environment, I have my API. So app secret is pretty simple, some secret, and that will be this, right? And then Mongo, you can see that I've got all this too, so I can just grab all that, and that's a quick way of recovering that information without me having to figure out what this is going to be. So now I'm pretty much up to date. So there's definitely a recovery method that I use especially when I don't have that information handy. All right, so I'll keep that open because we're going to get back there in a second. I'm just going to go back to our site. So I'm going to go kind of copy that to the clipboard and so we can see what this looks like at this point. One thing is that remember that we're using Render, and Render spins down you know, our stuff when we put it up there. It doesn't, because we're not paying anything for it. So the idea is that it allows us to put stuff up for free. We can use it, but then after some time, it spins down, which means it takes time for it to come up. If you're trying to use Postman and it is already spun down, you're going to get a timeout, right? And we don't want this timeout to be now, so that's why I'm kind of spinning it up right now, just to make sure that it knows that I've been using it today. It's kind of spin down again anyway, right? But just to test that everything is working out the way it is, we should always test Render as well. We also want to test out our local host, and that means that for now, what we're going to do is just going to do a couple things. We're running TypeScript. So first thing is that we always do is do a tsc-w, which runs the TypeScript compilation process, right? Which is going to run TypeScript here, and if there's any issues here whatsoever, it's going to figure it out. It says that we have a couple of errors, right? And it's funny because our modules, passport, and so on were working properly before. What could be this problem now? So if it has 233 errors, passport local schema and all this kind of stuff has nothing to do with me. All right, nothing to do with me. This is all, you know, stuff that's inside of our, remember, this was a node modules failure, something inside types, where we solve the problem by installing the type that we wanted, but it causes these issues. And if you have these problems, don't worry, because remember, this is the type definition library that's the problem. My concern is where you actually have an issue and you don't know what it is. Again, this has nothing to do with us, typically, right? So now this worries me, because this says not passport authenticate local, not all paths return a value. Let's take a look and see that things are pretty good here. So one thing we can check, of course, because this seems to be in the server's controller auth, let's take a look at that and see if we're good. So auth, there it is. And then it would have typically an error here if there was an issue. It does have a bit of a warning. It says that's a warning, and that's what it causes this to be an error, not all paths return a value. But let's see why. So here's return, return, and return, return. And notice that what is the other path? What if I can't log in? That's the other path, right? What if there's no user, right? We have a return there, and we have a return out here, and so on. And sometimes what this is looking for is another return inside of this thing. Sometimes it'll suggest it. Like if you actually go here and go to my little balloon, it says fix using Copilot. It may suggest something that is pretty good. Convert to an anonymous function. That's also something that we can do, and so on. And a bunch of other stuff here. For now, I'm going to leave it because I know it works. I know it works. I'm going to come back to this, and we may fix it later on. But for now, this is the first part. Now that I have that, and I know this is the only problem, I'm just going to run another thing, which is going to be NodeMon. There's NodeMon. And again, NodeMon, what it's going to do is hopefully connect to our Mongo database, right, without any issues. Again, if it doesn't, well, no, there it is connected to MongoDB Atlas. That's really good. And then the other thing we want to do with this MongoDB Atlas is actually run some basic things locally. So again, going up here, and you can see here that kind of worked. So that's up on render. So if I go API, we have this. We can see pretty what this looks like. Let's try this locally now with our localhost 3000. You can see that that's pretty fast. We can do API. We can get the same result. So now we're really good. And we know that things are working, at least from where we, for the most part, what we had last time. We could do a test with Postman, and what that means is like running things like we did before, which is something like, hey, let's log in, and with doing a username and password. So that's something we can try out, and that'll kind of verify that part. And I need Postman anyway, so I might as well pull it up now. All right, so let's try this out. Yep, let's sign in. And yep, so I'm just going to do that like so. And sign in. And open Postman. And we should have a good sign in, which allows me to check what we did last time. So there's our space. What I want to do here is I want to do a login, which is a post type request, right? And the way that works, of course, when I log in is I want to do localhost 3000. Remember, this is just review from last week, API/login, right? And again, remember, I need a body, right? So I've got to go to URL unencoded and put in there the first key, which is username. We're going to say admin, and the password. Here's our second key, password, and we're going to put in 123456, and then click send. And if everything goes well, we should be able to log in and we get the information. This is good confirmation that everything is working as it should locally, and that's pretty good. All right, so that is what we want. And again, this is the information we're getting here is a lot, and remember, we're using it for testing purposes only. Real life, wouldn't do this, okay, because this is a lot too much information to share with the user. You might just cut it down to something like username admin logged in. That's it, and that's what you get back. But we're going to get more than that coming up, because when we log in, we're also going to get a token. So we're going to change this process as well as we go forward. So that's the first thing. All right, so now that we've done that, and this is the first part of in-class exercise 6, always trying to get in-class exercise 5 working with the new name. That's all it is. A couple of changes I want to make. Package.json should say 006. Right? Again, just to keep up to date. That's what I like to do there. And I also want to change our server configuration. Not that we've ever done any kind of debugging with this with Morgan, but I just want to keep this all up to date just to be a completionist more than anything else. Okay, that's all done. We're ready to go now, and let's put this up on GitHub, because that is the next thing we need to do. So again, I'm just going to do git git commit -m, and we'll say added project files for in-class exercise 6, and then push. We always want to confirm that this is also going well, because we have a little link here. We could check that out and make sure that here, probably press that too many times. No, it's good. Here's in-class exercise 6. It looks like it's all going well, and we put everything up on GitHub. So that's the first step. Next step. So now that we have all this stuff open, there's 5. If I refresh that, there's 6. We can close this one off. Now that I've confirmed all that, that's great, right? The next part that we want to do is talk about JWT. So JWT, what is it? Why do we need it? Remember what we're trying to do, sign in. There is no state. We can't, kind of retain state when we're using an API. An API is completely separate than the front end. It doesn't know that you're logged in. It doesn't know anything. It doesn't even know who you are. Every time we access the API endpoint, we need to tell it that, hey, it's me. Hey, it's me. Hey, it's me. How do I do that, right? There needs to be some kind of messaging system that goes back and forth, and it needs to be secure. So this is where JWT comes in. So again, it stands for JSON Web Token, or JOT for short. I never use JOT. I always use JWT. And basically what it does is it passes a claim, and the claim, remember, this is a whole trust situation where we want the API server to trust us, to say, hey, remember, authentication is this is who I am. Authorization is this is what I can do, right? Who am I and what I can do. Those are the two things, authentication and authorization. So we make a claim. I claim that I'm Tom. Okay, that's my claim. And how do I do that? I need to verify that I'm Tom by sending my token back to the to the server. And when the server receives a token, it says, okay, this is the token I created. It's a valid token. Tom, that's Tom. We can let him do what he's going to do now. And I need to do that sending every time I make a secure request. If I want to do create, read, well, not read, maybe create, update, and delete, those three things, which are destructive potentially, then I have to be able to secure myself by using some kind of system, and a messaging system like JWT is exactly what we need. All right, so again, it's basically using a lot of frameworks and everything else. And what it really does, you get a JSON web token that kind of looks like this. Some weird token that looks like this, okay? And notice the dot here. So this is kind of interesting. And there's another dot over here. It actually breaks it down into three little sections, okay? And we're going to talk about these three little sections. This whole thing is called the payload, right? And so again, we have a signature, right? And the signature itself, has a claim about who I am. It usually has embedded in it, things like, the username, and stuff like that, and other information about the user that basically, kind of sends information to the server saying, this is who I am, okay? So claims, like, again, are assertions typically made about a certain party or object. So I'm claiming to be Tom, like I said, and what we want to try and do is verify identity. That's really what it's about, right? And so what problems do JWT solve? We want to transfer claims between two parties, typically client and server. So I have a client environment, and that's usually some kind of web app or a mobile application, which is what we're going to get into in the second half of the semester. And we're going to send that information. We're going to retain that token that we get from the server, and then we're going to send that information back to the server saying, yes, this is who I am. Yes, this is who I am. Yes, this is who I am. All right, you're going to say that a few times every single time you go back and forth. So again, we talked about this: authentication, authorization, federated identity, client-side sessions that are stateless, client-side secrets. These are all things that we can use it for. We can also use it for password reset. I've used it for that. We can also use it for email verification. When I use a JWT, I send the email verification token to your email, and then when you press a button, it returns that token back to the server within a time frame. It expires within a certain time. And if you send it back within that time frame, usually 10 or 15 minutes or whatever it is, you can reset your password or you can verify who you are. Those are the two uses that are very common with JWT as well. So that's something that we can do with this thing as well, okay? So again, it's brief history. This JSON object signing, an encryption group was formed in 2011, so back around again. Think about this. 2015 was that special year where everything happened, right? We had a bunch of things happening when it came to the web, right? The web really was transforming into ECMAScript 6. TypeScript was really taking off. Angular as a front end was really, really popular at that time, more popular than Create.js, React, because React was more like it's just coming into being at that point, and so on. So there was a lot of things going on, and more web applications were being created. And so this is where our JSON web tokens came to be, right? So one thing is that we have to create these client-side stateless sessions, right? And these client-side stateless sessions, like we said, have no identity, right? They're not connected. They're not like tightly coupled, if you will, to your backend. Typically, if we make a monolithic application, like if I'm making something that is like massive application that's everything in one, where you have your front end and your back end together. Let's suppose I'm just making an Express, website. Express can have a view engine, right? Like EJS, like we did it the first day, right? And those two things are very tightly coupled, right? There's no difference between the front end and the back end. It's all server-side rendering, right? That's what we're doing. When we have it that way, there's no need for JWT, because what I can do is I can use client-side sessions, with HTML, right? Because we're tightly coupled with one big monolithic application. Here, we're not tightly coupled. Here, this backend, this Express API, can be used to point to different things. I can point to a mobile app. I can point to a game. I can point to, a web app. I can point to anything I want, right? So a lot of different clients can connect to this thing. It doesn't know what the client is, and HTML sessions just don't work, right? So there is no state. And because of that, we have to prove who we are constantly. Again, a bit of overhead when it comes to using an Express API or any API. Good thing about it is we're able to create this, this structure, right, that we can communicate back and forth. Oh yeah, one more thing just to add, since we're talking about tokens, JWTs can also be used as an API token itself. Kind of if you want an open API where anyone can join and kind of connect, you can create, again, that fancy string of characters with a JSON web token. You can do that, right? Which is kind of neat, for creating all those uses. Really great stuff that we want to use. An API key. All right, so that is, why it's useful, right? And how it works. I'm just going to skip through this. This is for your information. If you want to read more detail, I've included it here just for you. So again, what we want to do is we want to sign that token, and the signature is going to basically says, hey, this is me, right? So it kind of works like this. You have your server as an example, and there could be some attacks on the server. And the way this can work is this man in the middle idea. A malicious user could kind of try and capture the token, modify it somehow, and try and get in. That's one of the concerns with JWTs because it's out there. Once I make a JWT, here's something you can't do. You can't expire it. So if I make it last a week, it's a week. It lasts a whole week, right? And that means if someone gets a hold of that token, they can use it to be you, right? That's one problem with it. So what we don't want to do is store that token anywhere clear text. I don't want to store it, as an example, typically on the server. Like let's say on a database, if we're going to store it, we need to even do some encryption on top of that if we're going to do it. If we're going to take that token, we don't want to store it inside a session, or local storage anywhere on a web application. On a mobile device, it's a little different. It's not like you have complete access to stuff. You really have to dig into that mobile device to get access to the storage, the local storage on the mobile device to get access to that. So typically, mobile devices aren't something that we're so concerned with anymore in terms of JWT. When I send a JWT to a mobile device, I can store it somewhere. You're probably not going to know where it is, right? Is it completely secure? No. Remember with security, my friends, if I have a lock, someone is going to try and pick it, right? It doesn't matter how complex it is. It doesn't matter what it is. If there's someone who's a malicious user or a bad actor, there's always a way to defeat security. Always. Just a matter of time, okay? So what we want to do is kind of, JWT takes care of some of this stuff, but it doesn't make it so that it is, unhackable. Nothing's unhackable, in my opinion. So again, shopping cart, another great use for JWT. Again, I have a disconnected backend from a front end. The backend is managing the shopping cart or shopping experience. I have super secure information that I want to retain on the backend. Shopping cart is going to communicate with the backend saying, I've got an authenticated user, they're logged in, they've got an order, here it is. That order is going to be a package that I'm going to send to the backend. It's going to process it, and then and all that kind of stuff in the front end. Now remember, what we're going to be talking about in the second half of the semester is some great APIs, not just ours, but some great APIs that exist out there that we can use out of the box, for shopping experience. For example, Stripe, which we're going to kind of deal with in the second half. An API that's completely ready to kind of inject all the stuff that you need to put in your credit card information and everything else, and it's just out of the box. It works great. So instead of making our own, even holding our own information, the user information on a database, which is probably not as secure as Stripe, right? Using a third party like that is a good idea. All right, so that is our definition of how someone can hack if they wanted to do that. So there's some security considerations we have to be aware of. One of them is signature stripping. All right, if they strip the signature away, from our JWT. Remember, there's 3 parts of JWT, right? The signature, the header, the payload, and the signature. Those 3 things, right? And if they take the signature away and they modify it, sometimes what ends up happening is they have the other 2 pieces, but not the third one. That could be an issue, right? But JWT is smart enough to understand if it's unsigned, that it's not valid, which is pretty cool. So they do that kind of thing like this. If you notice that this might be a whole JWT, that's a whole token that has some information about the user. And then what they're doing is they strip the signature away and they make their own. And so that you can say, well, now it's not admin, it's actually a root user, which means I have root access. And something like on an Android device, that could be pretty deadly, right? So we don't want that, or even an iOS device, if you have root access. So a malicious user can do that stuff. And the way we prevent that, of course, is, again, we hash this thing. We don't usually send it off other than HTTPS. We use those kind of things from a communication cycle perspective and all that kind of stuff. All right, other ones are cross-site request forgery, or CSRF. That's another consideration. And usually what happens is on HTTP, as an example, I might have an API where I can add user, and then I can do things like grant admin. And this, kind of cross-site request forgery can basically give admin rights to some user, any user, right? So we have to be careful about, adding this kind of situation. Something that's clear text in a GET request would be something we don't want to do ever on the server. We don't want this kind of thing to happen. And notice this is an image, my friends, an image that's like, instead of like the source being an actual image source, here we're just making a request to the backend server. So really tricky, that once that image comes into being, as soon as that page loads, it's going to do that thing, and it's going to grant admin access, and it's something that we can hide on a client side that's using the back end. So imagine the back end, it's an API, and I create the front end. I'm a malicious user, and I'm going to try and hack the back end with my front end that I make, right? Then I can do something like this, right? So be careful about this kind of stuff. I'm going to keep going. So, and this is how it works. So again, a malicious user, gets the malicious tag, and then the server is compromised. All right. Just going to skip through this. Cross-site scripting. Okay, so another attack that happens with JavaScript, where injected JavaScript can steal tokens from cookies and local storage. Again, we don't want to use cookies and local storage as much as possible on the front end. We don't want that. We want to avoid this, because if we use cookies and local storage, then all of a sudden, someone can steal our identity. So we want to be able to store this in an HTTP only cookie, right? If we're going to do that, that's stored on the server side completely on its own. If we're using a front end web application like React or Angular, okay? So that's what we don't want to do. And I'm just going to move on. So this is the idea behind that. Moving on, because this is not a security course, but I wanted to include some of these things just so that you understand that there is a risk when we're sending information with a JWT. So again, these three elements, just to recall: header, payload, and signature. We need those kind of things when we're creating our JWT. And what does the header have? It carries a header with claims about itself, like who am I, right, kind of stuff. The payload is all the data. That's the user data that happens, and the signature is something where we have a signed token from the user when the user logs in and logs out. So three things: I'm logged in, this is who I am, this is my capability, this is my authorization, different than authentication, and by the way, this is the data I'm sending. So I want to use a passport JWT strategy, and this is something that I want to do with Passport, right? So let's take a look at that. So if I go back to Passport.js, remember this from last week? Passport.js, remember that there was a bunch of strategies, right? And Passport JWT is a strategy we want to use today, right? So this is what's happening here. And what we're doing is, right here, is we're basically installing Passport JWT. That's what's going to happen here. We're going to create a new JWT strategy, and this strategy is going to be using our JWT, or we're going to generate a token, and that token is going to be sent to the user, and the user is going to be able to take that. Upon sign in, they need to capture that token somehow in a secure way. That's on us, the users, the developers, to capture that token in a secure way, and then send it back every single time we need to do some kind of secure operation. Okay, that's how it works. All right, so this is the site for this. Remember, there are several other strategies, and we kind of really briefly talked about them For example, there are Google OAuth. Like if I want to log in with Google, that is also a thing to do, talking about third-party authentication. And with third-party authentication, what we're doing is we're creating a three-way trust situation. Again, I talked about this briefly last week, where if Google trusts me, right, or I trust Google, and Google trusts you, right, then if you're logging in with Google, then I trust you. Three-way trust, relationship, right? And the reason why this is good, it gives clients, users, a chance to log in with the passwords that they already have. We don't store anything too much secure on our end, like as developers. The information is stored mostly with Google. All the heavy lifting stuff is done on the Google side. And all we do is store the fact that you are good, you're authenticated, you're someone that we can trust with Google. Sometimes with third-party authentication, we are able to get authorization from the user to transfer all of the user information from Google, like username, password, address information, email, all that kind of stuff from Google. That's where you're giving access to our own site. Then we can kind of create a profile based on the same information that we would have from Google, right? Now, in order for us to do this, we have to use OAuth. We have to register an API key with Google for our particular API. So that has to be a thing. And then, so Google trusts us. If Google doesn't trust our site, none of this is going to happen. All right, so that's how it works, in terms of how this is happening. I'm not going to demonstrate this for you guys this semester, but it's not that difficult to figure out, to be honest. And the main one that I would recommend there's two that I would definitely recommend. Google is definitely a good one. The other one is LinkedIn. I like that a lot. Maybe GitHub. Maybe that's the third one that I might use. Those three are pretty good to use. Microsoft, all right? It can be used. I like it a lot too, but you need to create OAuth through Microsoft Azure now, which is a further complication to using Microsoft. There's other things you can log in and use as well, any kind of, lots of them, but those are the major ones that I recommend that we trust. Even when we did things with Render, remember I had to log in with GitHub. GitHub is pretty good. And you can look at that. If I said something like, OAuth, right? And then I said something like GitHub, or if I just typed in GitHub, right? So there's Passport GitHub 2, right? Passport GitHub. So it says GitHub authentication strategy for Passport. And if we're going to look there, it talks about how to do it, as an example. And this is the GitHub strategy. And notice that client secret, GitHub client secret comes from GitHub plus a client ID. We get all this stuff when we log in. We create a OAuth with GitHub. That's what this does, all right? And it talks about how to make middleware happen. And there's lots of examples online about how to use OAuth 2.0 with GitHub and so on. Don't recommend things like Facebook anymore because Facebook isn't as popular or other social media apps other than LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is probably safe. But things like Facebook and Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, is now X, and other things like TikTok, definitely not. I wouldn't use those kind of things. But all of them have a way of using OAuth, even if it's not listed here. Okay, so that is your OAuth, third-party authentication. If you wanted to attempt that, it's pretty neat. And if we have time later this semester, we'll try and do it. For now, it's not really something that I want to do this week. I want to get that done just with regular JWT. So JWT is what we want to use. And again, going back to that, there are a few different things here. And we want to use this one, Passport JWT, which is what we're going to be doing this week. Back to this. So that's what we're going to be doing. And Passport allows an option to store the user object in the request object. So that's one really great thing, instead of the session object. So instead of, in the request object itself, it's going to store the user object. So request.user. And this is kind of neat because everything is stored on the back end, right? And now take a listen. The client saves the token locally, typically in local storage. Now, this is bad. We just talked about, if I know that it's being stored in local storage, then I can send it back, and it says in every subsequent request. I don't think I would store it in local storage. I would probably store it in something called an HTTP only cookie nowadays. This is what I would do, okay? So we need to install a couple things, and this is the first step of doing in-class exercise 6 beyond just copying it from in-class exercise 5. So I'm going to start with this part right here. Let's do our installation steps first. Okay, so back to this. And again, what we want to do always when it comes down to that is we want to think about are all the stuff we want to add into our package.json. So here's our package.json. You know, you can see we have EJS and Express and all that stuff. What we want is the new stuff that I want to add in. So let's add that in. So we want to do a yarn add, and we want to add in CORS. So CORS is cross-origin resource sharing. We want to be able to do that. Just in case you want to run an application like Angular or React on the same server that you're running your API. So let's say, for example, I'm running a front end like on Render, and I'm also running the back end on Render. Problem with that is it's on the same server, and typically we don't want it's almost like if I do, it's the same origin and they're kind of talking to each other, and sometimes that can be seen as a security problem, and so we add CORS to combat that problem. We want JSON Web Token to be added in. Those are the two things. So we have to actually have JSON Web Token in there as well. Let me go back and talk about this as another NPM module. So again, whenever it comes to NPM modules, you can always look it up on npmjs.org.com. So if I say something like JSON Web Token, then it'll take you to this, and you can see all the time, always take a look at this when you're looking at NPM modules. How many weekly downloads do they have? If there are enough weekly downloads, like 15 million here, you can clearly see it's something that is very commonly used. And also take a look at the last time it's been updated. This was published 9 months ago. So it's fairly stable, but I mean, this is version 9.02 of JSON Web Token, and you can see they've migrated from version 8 to version 9 and a bunch of other stuff. They also give you the way to use it. There's the usage and some great little examples about how this works. If you ever need to go in here and check your, kind of check different documentation, this is where even ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini would scrape from. It would scrape from this kind of stuff to try and figure out what you should do, right, if you're asking it for help. Okay, so that's what it does. So this is great documentation here. It talks about how to do the signing and all that kind of stuff. It talks about expiry dates and how to set that up. Date.now divided by 1,000, that's like the current second multiplied by 60 by 60. That talks about how to create an hour of expiration, right? So because there are 1,000 milliseconds in every second, multiplying that by 60 gives us 60 minutes, or 60 seconds times, that's a minute, times 60 minutes is an hour, right? That gives us then the amount of milliseconds that we need, and that's what's going to figure out the expiry date, right? And based on now, so we're basically saying, hey, take that millisecond that we have now from the year 1970, because what it does, date.now gives us the milliseconds expired or kind of used ever since 1970, January 1st, 1970, which is they call it the Linux epoch, right? Take that date, subtract it from the current date. We have a number of milliseconds, then divide that by 1,000. That's the current date, and then we add that an hour to that, and that's what's happening here. We add an hour to that number, and now we can expire in about an hour. And that's how that works. So that's kind of something that we're going to be talking about too. It talks about how to verify and all that kind of stuff here, and it discusses many different things. So that's why JSON Web Token is also part of our package sequence. Back to this. So Passport, so CORS, JSON Web Token, and Passport JWT. Let's do that next. So again, it's Passport JWT, and that's all we need. So let's add those in. And they get added in here. Now, just like before, we need, some of those to be type definitions. So we're going to say yarn add at types. /cores. We know that's the case. And we also need at types. I'm doing this in one line again. JSON web token. We need that one. And passport at types passport -jwt --dev. Dev means development dependency. It's for us as developers. We don't need this as a project dependency. It's not required. If we didn't put this in there, and if we just use JavaScript instead of TypeScript, it's going to work, right? And here we're going to push this in, and then that's going to download those packages to make sure we have all the support we need to kind of run JWT on our server. So that's the first thing. So those are adding in those local packages. So we can certainly put that up on GitHub. So I'm going to say git add dot git commit -m. We'll say added npm packages to support JWT. Okay, so that's push. There we go. So that's going to give us everything we need, right? Which is going to be something, and I'm doing this step by step to show you what this is, what you need to do. Next, once we have this, we need to change the configuration of our app. So we have installed it, but we need to modify our app.ts. We need to include cores. We need to include our passport JWT strategy. That's the configuration changes we need, plus other things that we're going to put in there as well. Let's do that now. And I'm going to do that inside of our app.ts configuration. So let's do that. So again, I'm going to go to app.ts here, this one. And we're going to start talking about how to include that. So after we've got modules for authentication, that's like our session and passport and so on, we're going to build on this. And we're going to say modules for JWT support. And what we want in here is I'm going to import cores from cores. We want to do that. We're also going to import passport JWT from passport JWT. We definitely want to add that in there. I also want to define JWT aliases, okay? And one thing is I want to say that JWT strategy is, this is our alias for passport JWT. We want that in there. And we also want to be able to extract JWT with our passport JWT dot extract JWT. Those are the two aliases. Instead of me saying this all the time, I just have to say this, right? Instead of saying this, it's like a macro in C++, I only have to say this, okay? Which is kind of something we want to do. And the other thing I want to do is, I'm going to scroll down. Some of this stuff, remember when it comes to middleware, we talked about this as a middle function that goes between other functions. We want to make sure that we do things in the right order because for us, order matters. So what I want to do is I want to add cores to the config. And the way that's going to be is app use cores. I need to put that in there. And notice I do this after the cookie parser. Again, that's what works for me. I always found. So DB secret, that's okay. Saved uninitialized false. All this stuff for our session secret. I mean, we're not going to use it anymore, but it's okay. We'll leave it in place. Passports, you know, we use create strategy here, and then we serialize and deserialize users. This is all good, but before we get to our index router, this is where we're going to do some. We're going to set up some JWT options, okay? And the JWT options is, so I think these are good, which are basically JWT options. We're going to make, it's an object, okay, that we're going to kind of create. And it says JWT from request. We're going to use extract JWT from auth header as bearer token. Now this is interesting because, so what this means is we're sending an auth header, an authentication header, every single time we make a request from the back end. And as bearer token, that means I'm the bearer, I'm the person that's holding this token, right? Coming from the client. So this is the token coming from the client. And that's what this means, from auth header as bearer token. So I'm getting the JWT, the signing the token. So it says extract this token from the header. That's where it's going to come from. And then my secret or key is my DB secret. You can definitely make another one if you want, and you can make it more secure than this. Like again, we're using like some secret. In a real world scenario, you'd have to generate one that is more secure. Let's set up JWT strategy. That's the next thing. And for this one, it takes a little bit more work. Okay, so I'm going to say let strategy equal to a new JWT strategy where I want to pass in the options. I want to pass in the options, and I want to, once I've passed in this stuff, notice it's trying to do a find by. So strategy itself, notice the strategy says that we're redeclaring a block, right? We're redeclaring a block. And we had strategy somewhere up here. Remember, we had created a strategy, and strategy was passport local strategy. That was the alias we were using when we were logging in with username and password, and that was okay with username and password. Can't use this anymore, so we're going to comment this out. All right, so that's the first thing. So no more just passport local strategy, because we're using username and password, but we're using JWT. We're moving on to something else, and so this is the first part. So strategy, we want to create our payload. We're going to close that off. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's why it's giving us an error there. And JWT options, we're making a new anonymous function where we're passing in the JWT payload. The payload is the data, right, as an example. And then what we want to try and do is we want to do a try catch. So here's our try catch block, try catch. Here's a try catch. And in the try catch block, let me just put that in there because we may have an error. Okay. We want to create a const user object, which is equal to user.findById, the JWT payload ID. So what this is going to do for us, right, is we're going to get the payload, right, and we're going to get the signature, the ID from the payload. And this ID itself is going to be the deconstructed user object, the information about the user. We're going to find that user. And then if that user exists, if we're able to decrypt that user information from JWT, we're going to say if user, then we're going to be good. We're going to say then, okay, fine, return user. And then the done object, what it does is it passes a verified callback, right, back from the user saying everything is good. That's what this strategy is going to hold, right? And if not, then it's going to return an error. All right. So notice it says user, and then if everything is good, to return the user. What about if, as an example, what about if? So make sure that this is correct. We don't really need this else statement, right? Because at the end of the day, if notice it says null false, we don't want to do null false like this. We can actually just remove the else. Oops. Because this is redundant, we don't need the else statement here, right? Because we can just basically say, look, if it come back, if this doesn't return a user, then it's going to come to here, and if it comes to here, then we really didn't do a proper job. Okay, so this is not what happened. The other thing we can get is if we catch an error, and that's usually to do with some kind of error that comes from the server. Okay, so we're going to return that done error. Okay, again, done is that callback. That's what that is. Okay, the verified callback. It's just called done by convention. All right, so that is our strategy. Our strategy itself, we've configured it now, and it's creating this JWT strategy object, and we're configuring the constructor for that object by using a couple things. The options that we have here, right? That's how it's going to work. Passing in the payload and the callback for how it's going to function. So this is all the configuration for our strategy. Once we have the configuration done for our strategy, then and only then can we do a passport.use strategy. So this is where we're going to employ that strategy that we've just created here. Okay, so this is like deploy the strategy. Okay. So that's what's happening there. So that is your configuration, and that has to happen on your app.ts. Okay, that's the first part. Next, now that we have that save, let's put that up on GitHub. So we're going to say git commits -m, and we're going to say configured app with JWT strategy. That's what we did. We've done the configuration for the app, git push. We haven't tested it yet. We just configured it. And we're going to test that off in a second. Next, now that we've got this piece, all right, we need some additional help. And one thing we need to figure out is how we're going to generate that token. And typically what I like to do is inside of our util function, here's our util. Then right now, all we have is this sanitize array, okay? And what I want to do is I also want to use another function that I can access from anywhere, which is going to be able to generate that token from any other place. Remember, whenever we make a util folder like this and have a index, it kind of can create multiple utility functions that I can use in from a global perspective anywhere in my Express API, right? So here, what I want to do is, I know I'm going to use a couple of things, okay? Let's import a couple of things we need. I know I'm going to use JWT, right? And that's going to be for our JSON Web Token, like we talked about before. This is where it's going to help me generate the token. The other thing that I want to do is I want to import our database from config database, because that's where our secret's going to come from, all right? At least that's where we store it right now. Okay, so those are the two things we're probably going to need. The next thing we're going to probably need is I want to export a function that I want to call something like generate token. Look, it even knows what I want to do. The token is going to take in a user object, which is of type user document. And we kind of defined user document last week as a global type. That's what we did, right? It's going to return a string. That string is going to be the token, right? Next, what I want to do is I want to define a couple of things. I want to say, let's make the payload. So the payload itself is going to be equal to what? It's going to be the ID, which is the user ID. That's going to be the payload, right? As well as the display name, right? Which is going to be the user display name. And email username, that's definitely something we want, which is the user.username. And the email address, which is the user.email address. Now notice that I have issues with this because user itself, it says it doesn't have a property called, on display name capital D. It has a display name lowercase d. We need to conform with the document that we created. So it kind of looks like this. So these are the things we have. Display name, username, email address, and I put them in the right configuration. That is our payload. And notice our payload creates a special kind of object. That's our object that we're creating. Next, we want to have something called JWT options. And the JWT options, again, are going to be things like how long it expires. We talked about this. So I want to say expires in. That is the definite thing that we want. And we're going to use 604,800, which is approximately 1 a week. That's what it is. That's expires in. And again, I want to make some notes here. Like, just so you know, this may be a security risk, because the token will be valid for a week. I think this is a good thing to put in, because if it's too long, if the token is valid for too long, bad things can happen. If I'm hanging out this thing for too long, like an actual valid token, I can continue to use it, or someone can steal it, as an example, a lot easier if it's for a long period of time. So that is the JWT options. The last part of this thing, because I want to return this string, is where I generate my token. So I want to return jwt.sign, and I want to pass in the payload, the DB secret, and JWT options. And this is where we're actually going to sign the token with all this information. So this is our generate token function. And one thing we haven't talked about is documentation. And if I want to talk documentation, let's do that by using document this. That's an extension for, VS Code, where we generate a token for the user. All right, so that kind of gives us our user document, string, and so on. We also didn't do the sanitize array. Let's do that too, since we're here. We'll document this as well. We'll document this as well. And this is kind of a sanitize an array of strings. So that's what this does. We've got our documentation. This is a good header, which is using JavaDoc, which you guys should be familiar with, which is pretty much what we've seen, kind of in other places where we have the user document and so on, which is a type user, string, and so on. Okay, so that is something that we're doing. And if I hover over generate token now, it's going to say, hey, generate token is a user document, generates a token for the user. The param is a user that we're going to get in, which is of type document, user document. Okay, that's what it does. All right, so that is our generate token function. Let's add that to GitHub. So git commit -m, and we'll say added generate token function to util. Git push. Git next step. So we're kind of creating all the pieces. We're configuring still until we have everything we need for our JWT. Okay, that's how this works. And that's really good. That's kind of our first piece. So now that we have that, let's go back to our PowerPoint. So we'll see where we are. We did this. We did all this, right? We did all this for the most part. I just used TypeScript instead of JavaScript. And we did all this, right? Which is, instead of requiring, we're using importing. Same idea. Definitely. Now this is in the controllers index.js. So we're going to do this next. This is where I want the controller itself, the auth controller, to use JSON Web Token to do things like logging in and so on. And what I'm doing is, in the request login, I'm going to add in a payload. This is the payload that we're going to get. And notice what we're going to do is we're going to assign, instead of doing it here, we're going to generate the token from using our util function that I just made. Okay, that's what I'm doing. So instead of doing all this payload stuff, we just did all that. And the reason why I don't want to just have it here is because I can use that generate token stuff, like I said, to verify an email address. I can verify, I can reset the user password. I can do a lot of stuff with JWTs other than just logging in and securing stuff. That's why it's really good to have that as a utility function. And that's why I made it that way. All right, so that's where we're going to do it. And so that we have to swim back to our auth controller, and that's where we're going to do all that stuff. Okay, so where we're going to basically say, when we log in, right, we're going to change some stuff now so that we get our auth token from the generate token function, and then we're going to use that every single time. But we're going to do that after the break. I've gone about an hour and 15, an hour and 14 right now. I'm going to take a 10-minute break. When I come back, we're going to make video number 2. All right. So for now, this is a good place to pause and the recording. And the next recording, we're going to add in all that next piece, which is making sure that the login has it, start securing our stuff, and test it all, because we can't even test it yet, with Postman, put it up on render and test it that way as well. So we'll stop this now. When I come back, we'll continue with the next part.